There is something quietly remarkable about the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. Most people know them for their eucalyptus haze, that soft blue mist that drifts between the sandstone ridges like the memory of something ancient. They know the Three Sisters, they know Katoomba. They know the winding road that climbs out of the Sydney Basin and takes you into a world that feels older, calmer, somehow apart from everything modern and hurried. But beneath all of that, beneath the fern-covered gully floors, beneath the old limestone formations, beneath the roots of centuries-old Angophora trees, there are tunnels. Some of them are well documented, some of them are forgotten, and some of them, even after years of investigation, remain completely and entirely unexplained. Tonight, we are going to descend into them together, slowly, thoughtfully, the way you might lower yourself into a warm bath at the end of a long day. There is no rush here. The tunnels have been waiting for a very long time, and they will wait a little longer while we find our way in. So settle in now. Let your body feel heavy against whatever is holding you. Notice the weight of your limbs, the slow rise and fall of your chest. Let your eyes grow soft and heavy as we make our way together through the quiet dark beneath the mountains. We have 15 tunnels to explore tonight. 15 mysteries, 15 places where history pauses, looks at its own notes, and quietly admits that it does not quite have the answer. We begin. The first tunnel is in the limestone country east of Hartley Vale Township. The Great Western Highway descends from Lithgow toward the Hartley Valley in long, sweeping curves, and if you have ever driven it at dusk, you will know how strange and lovely it feels. The valley opens up below you like something from a dream. Old stone farmhouses, colonial-era churches, a silence that feels earned rather than empty. In 1987, a geologist named Paul Whitmore was conducting routine survey work in the limestone formations east of Hartley Vale, when he noticed something that his instruments had not prepared him for. A depression in the rock face. A shadow that suggested depth where there should have been solid stone. He pressed his hand against the limestone, felt cool air moving against his fingers, and began to understand that the rock was not as solid as it appeared. It took him 3 days of careful excavation before he found the entrance. It was partially collapsed. It had been partially collapsed for a very long time, given the degree of secondary calcification around the breakdown pile. Whatever had caused the collapse had happened centuries ago, not decades. The passage beyond the entrance was not enormous. It was perhaps 1.5 meters wide at its broadest point, and it required a degree of crouching in certain sections, the low ceiling pressing you into a kind of reverence, whether you intended it or not. It extended approximately 80 meters into the hillside before it ended abruptly at a wall of collapsed material too substantial for a single geologist with hand tools to safely address. None of that was what troubled him. What troubled him was the wall on the left side of the passage, approximately 30 meters from the entrance, where someone had carved letters into the limestone. The letters were not Aboriginal. They were not the kind of markings associated with any Indigenous tradition Whitmore was aware of, and he was careful enough to consult with local Darug and Gundungurra community representatives before drawing any conclusions. They confirmed that the markings did not correspond to any traditional visual language they recognized. They were, for want of a better description, alphabetic. They used a script that resembled, in certain respects, an archaic form of Latin lettering, but the resemblance was imperfect, and the arrangement of characters did not resolve into any Latin phrase or word that subsequent linguists could identify. There were 47 characters in total, arranged in 3 lines. The middle line was shorter than the outer 2. The carving was deep and deliberate. Not the casual scratching of someone sheltering from rain, but the considered work of someone with tools and time and intention. When a small sample of calcium carbonate from within one of the carved grooves was analyzed, the results suggested that the carving had occurred, at minimum, several centuries before European contact with the Australian continent. This result has been disputed. It has been questioned on methodological grounds, on grounds of sample contamination. These are legitimate scientific disputes, and they have not been definitively resolved in either direction. Paul Whitmore spent the remaining years of his geological career thinking about those 47 characters. He produced 2 papers, neither of which attracted significant mainstream attention. He corresponded with linguists in 4 countries. He visited the passage approximately once per year for as long as his health permitted. He never reached a conclusion. He simply returned, again and again, to the cool dark and the wall where the letters waited, patient as limestone is patient, which is to say, almost infinitely so. The passage is not open to the public. The 47 characters remain. Nobody knows what they say. Let that thought settle over you softly, like a blanket in a cool room. Someone was there, long ago, in the dark beneath the limestone hills, with tools and purpose and something they wanted to record. And whatever it was, it is still there, still waiting, still silent in the careful dark. The limestone country around Hartley Vale is part of a broader geological formation that extends across a substantial portion of the western Blue Mountains. This limestone was laid down in a sea that covered this part of Australia approximately 350 million years ago. Think about that for a moment. 350 million years. At that time, there were no vertebrates on land. There were no dinosaurs. There were no mammals. The organisms whose bodies and shells accumulated to form this limestone were invertebrates of the shallow sea. The limestone lay beneath the sea for millions of years, compressing and consolidating. It was then uplifted as the Australian continent moved and changed. It was eroded. It was dissolved by slightly acidic rainwater. And in the dissolving, voids formed. The karst system that created the passage where Paul Whitmore pressed his hand against the rock and felt cool air moving across his fingers. Whitmore was a geologist. He spent his career thinking about deep time. He was not a man easily impressed by the mere age of things, because everything he studied was ancient by any human standard. But the 47 characters impressed him, not because they were old, but because they were deliberate, because they represented a mind, a human mind, working in the dark of a limestone cave, expressing something in a form that assumed someone else would come and receive it. The act of writing is always an act of faith in the future. You write because you believe that someone will read. The person who carved those characters was making that same act of faith. They were saying, I was here, and I had something to say, and I believed that eventually someone would stand in this place and receive it. Paul Whitmore was that someone. He stood in the place. He received the intention, the presence, the fact of a mind that had been in this passage before him. His wife said, and this is recorded in a personal letter held by his family, that the characters reminded her of the last words of a person who knows they are dying. Not because the inscription was morbid, but because of the quality of intention in it, the specific gravity of something that was meant to last. 47 characters, 3 lines, the middle line shorter. Whatever it says, it was worth saying under those conditions. In the dark, with tools, in a passage that required effort to enter and would require equal effort to leave. The limestone around the inscription continues to grow, layer by imperceptible layer. In a few thousand years, if the passage remains undisturbed, the inscription may be coated in a thin, translucent layer of new calcium carbonate, sealed beneath stone as surely as if it had been painted over. But still there, still legible in principle, still saying whatever it says in its 47 patient characters. The second tunnel is connected to a journal entry that most historians have read without quite knowing what to do with it. William Cox was 60 years old when he led the road-building party across the Blue Mountains in 1814. He was managing difficult terrain, uncertain water supplies, the complex dynamics of a group of convicts performing forced labor at the edge of European settlement in one of the most remote places on Earth. He managed all of this with apparent equanimity. His journal is not a document of complaint. It is a document of progress. He was also a man who noticed things, and on a late November day in 1814, he wrote an entry that has attracted persistent quiet attention from historians ever since. He had sent a man named Henderson with 4 others to follow the drainage downslope from their camp, to see if water that disappeared beneath the western rock face emerged again at lower elevation. Henderson returned at dusk. Cox described him as much agitated. Henderson reported that the water did not emerge as expected, but instead entered a series of chambers of considerable size underground, in which he observed masonry work of an unfamiliar character. Cox instructed Henderson to say nothing of this to the other men. He noted that he would investigate himself when circumstances permitted. He never recorded such an investigation. Masonry is a specific word. Cox was a builder, a man whose professional life involved the assessment and execution of masonry construction. If Cox recorded the word masonry based on Henderson's report, it is at minimum worth considering that Henderson described something that looked, to the eyes of a practical colonial worker, like constructed stonework. Henderson himself appears in the Cox Journal on 3 other occasions, always in practical contexts: moving materials, organizing work parties, resolving minor disputes. He is not someone who appears to have been given to dramatic invention. Masonry work of an unfamiliar character. In a series of chambers of considerable size, underground, on a slope of the Cox's River system in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, in late November of 1814. The Cox's River runs today much as it always has, clear, cold, fed by the rainfall of the Blue Mountains catchment. Beneath the valley floor, in the limestone and sandstone through which it has carved its course over millions of years, there are cavities, there are passages. Whether among those voids there is something with walls of masonry work of an unfamiliar character has not been established. Thomas Henderson, the man who came back agitated at dusk, lived out the rest of his life in the colony. He was a convict who eventually became a free man by grant. His name in the Cox Journal is always as a surname only, which is the conventional form of reference for convicts in the colonial period, a small grammatical marker of a vast social hierarchy. He could not have anticipated that his brief experience, a few minutes in an underground space that he tried to describe to his employer, who summarized it in 8 words, would be the subject of discussion more than 2 centuries later. He could not have anticipated that people in the comfortable future would lie in warm beds thinking about the sound of his footsteps in an underground chamber on a late November day in 1814. But here we are, and there he was, and between then and now there is only the thin thread of a journal entry, holding the connection across time. You are sinking now, a little. The day's weight is leaving you in slow degrees. The Blue Mountains are far away, or perhaps they are very close, just at the edge of the quiet dark behind your closed eyes. The 3rd tunnel is in the Bell Range, in the quieter northern section of the Blue Mountains, where the roads are narrower and the settlements are smaller. In the early 1990s, a small group of amateur cave explorers discovered a series of interconnected passages in the Bell Range that they initially believed to be a straightforward cave system. The system was unusual in several respects. The first unusual thing was the airflow. Cave explorers pay close attention to airflow because air movement indicates connectivity. If air is flowing through a passage, it is flowing from somewhere and to somewhere, which means the passage connects 2 different environments. The airflow in the Bell Range passages was strong and, more curiously, consistent in a way that natural airflow typically is not. Natural cave airflow tends to vary with external conditions: atmospheric pressure, temperature differential, seasonal factors. The Bell Range airflow maintained a relatively constant velocity and direction across different seasons and different atmospheric conditions. The second unusual thing was the regularity of certain passage cross-sections. Most cave passages in limestone follow the path of least resistance through the rock, which produces passages that are irregular in cross-section, wider in some places, narrower in others, with wall textures that reflect the natural variability of the rock. Several of the Bell Range passages had sections where the cross-section was notably regular. Not perfectly regular, but regular in a way that suggested the natural passage had been modified, widened, shaped. The third unusual thing was a series of niches in the passage walls at intervals that one of the explorers, a man with a background in construction, described as too regular to be coincidental. Approximately 60 centimeters deep, roughly rectangular in form, spaced at what appeared to be consistent intervals along one particular passage, approximately 40 meters in length. He counted 11 of them before the passage narrowed beyond comfortable access. A local historian suggested that the niches, if human-made, might be consistent with a miner's niche, a small recess cut into the wall of a mine passage to hold a candle or lamp. But the Bell Range passages are not in an area with a documented history of formal mining. There are no mining leases recorded for the specific area in the colonial or early Federation period. There is no spoil heap in the vicinity, and the geology of the passage where the niches occur is not obviously mineral-bearing in a way that would have motivated a miner to work it. The ventilation theory, the hypothesis that the Bell Range passages were deliberately modified to function as a ventilation system for some larger underground complex, was proposed by one of the original explorers in a paper published in a small regional historical journal in 1994. The paper was not widely read, but the question it raised has not been answered. The question of ventilation in underground contexts is older than the Industrial Revolution. Wherever humans have gone underground, for mining, for quarrying, for the construction of chambers for any purpose, they have had to address the problem of air. Air goes stale underground. The carbon dioxide produced by breathing and burning accumulates. Without fresh air circulation, an underground space becomes first uncomfortable and then dangerous. Every civilization that has worked underground has had to understand this, at least empirically, if not theoretically. The Romans used ventilation shafts in their mines. Medieval miners in Europe used the same principle, refined through centuries of fatal experience. The engineering of mine ventilation is one of the oldest practical engineering disciplines. The bell range passages have the geometry of a designed ventilation system. This does not mean they are a designed ventilation system. It means they look like one to the people who have been in them. In the meantime, the air moves through the passages as it has always moved, steady, patient, from somewhere to somewhere, through the cool dark, at a velocity that does not change with the weather. Close your eyes a little more. Feel the cool movement of air, the breath of the mountain. The fourth tunnel was found by accident in the summer of 1903 by workers improving railway drainage near Wentworth Falls. During this work, the crew broke through into a void. The void was approximately 12 meters long, 4 meters wide, and somewhere between 2 and 3 meters high. The walls were too smooth, the floor was too level, the shape was too consistent. The official engineering report describes the cavity in matter-of-fact terms. It notes the dimensions. It notes that the void posed a potential stability risk to the railway cutting. It notes that the recommended course of action was infill with compacted clay and rubble, which was subsequently carried out. But appended to the formal report, in different handwriting, is a supplementary note. The author, likely the supervising engineer, a man named Thomas Harrington, describes several things that the formal report does not mention. He describes what he calls a floor treatment, not a natural stone floor, but a floor that appeared to have been prepared in some manner, possibly by the application of a binding material that had hardened over time to create a relatively smooth, consistent surface. He describes marks on the walls at regular intervals that he compares to post holes, recesses that might have held upright timbers, though any timber would long since have decomposed. He describes, at the far end of the cavity, a passage extension that was too narrow to enter without deliberate excavation, but through which a lantern could be pushed to illuminate a continuing void of unknown extent. And he describes, on the floor near the center of the cavity, an arrangement of stones that he found sufficiently remarkable to record in detail. 7 stones, placed in a pattern he describes as neither random nor immediately interpretable. Smooth river stones, not the local sandstone, which is to say they had been brought to that location from somewhere else, since the nearest river of appropriate character was a considerable distance away. Thomas Harrington trained as a civil engineer in England, probably in the 1870s. He would have trained in the tradition of Victorian civil engineering, deeply concerned with materials and forces and the behavior of structures under load. He knew what constructed spaces looked like. He had spent his career assessing and building them. And what he found in the cavity below the railway cutting at Wentworth Falls did not match the categories of construction he was familiar with. The 7 smooth river stones are the most intriguing detail. They did not belong there, not the stone type, not the smooth river-worn surface that only forms when stone spends extended time in a flowing river current. Someone brought them from a river to that cavity, arranged them deliberately, and left them there in a pattern that Harrington found noteworthy enough to describe carefully. River stones as objects of significance, as markers, as ritual objects, as components of spatial arrangements that carry meaning, appear in many cultural traditions. The smooth, rounded form of a river stone has a universal appeal to the human hand and eye. The compacted clay and rubble that filled the cavity in 1903 would have disturbed the arrangement, but probably not destroyed the stones themselves. They are in there somewhere, beneath the railway cutting, beneath the regrown vegetation, in the dark that Harrington briefly illuminated with his lantern on a summer day in 1903. Smooth and patient, in the dark. You are resting now. Your breath is slower than it was when we began. The 5th tunnel has a door that was locked from the wrong side. In the late 1970s, a team from the Sydney Speleological Society conducted a systematic survey of cave entrances in the Leura area. At a site in a gully approximately 2 kilometers south of Leura Township, they found a passage entrance concealed by vegetation. Inside, the passage widened quickly. At approximately 25 meters from the entrance, it opened into a chamber approximately 8 meters by 12 meters, with a ceiling height of around 4 meters. On the far side of the chamber was a second passage, leading deeper into the hillside, and across the entrance to this second passage, a barrier. The barrier was constructed of sandstone blocks, not the natural sandstone of the cave walls, but blocks that had been shaped. Their edges were too regular to be natural breakdown pieces. They had been mortared together with a substance that subsequent analysis suggested was a lime-based mortar. The barrier completely sealed the entrance to the second passage. It was approximately 1.5 meters high and extended from wall to wall of the passage opening, with only very minor gaps where the mortar had deteriorated. The survey team photographed the barrier extensively. They noted that the mortar appeared old, significantly older than anything they would expect from 20th century construction. They noted that the barrier showed no signs of external disturbance that would suggest it had been constructed from outside the cave. They noted that the barrier appeared to have been constructed from inside the passage, that is, from the far side looking outward. The arrangement of the blocks and the profile of the mortar joints suggested construction from within rather than from without. This is an important detail. If the barrier was constructed from inside the passage by people who were in the passage beyond it, it raises the question of how those people subsequently left. If they did not leave by retracing their steps past the barrier, they left by some other route, which implies that the passage beyond the barrier has another exit that the survey team was not in a position to find. Consider what it would mean to build a barrier in an underground passage from the far side. You would need materials, blocks of shaped stone, mortar. You would need to bring those materials into the cave through the entrance passage, or the materials were brought in from a different direction, from deeper in the system, from the passage beyond the barrier, through whatever other access the system provides. If the barrier was built from outside, from the chamber side, then the people who built it were retreating from the inner passage, sealing it behind them as they left. If the barrier was built from inside, from the inner passage side, then the people who built it were sealing themselves in, or sealing themselves off from the outer world, or sealing the passage while remaining on the far side, which means they had another way out that the survey team could not identify. The barrier, in a sense, is still working, still doing what it was built to do, whatever that was. Somewhere in the Blue Mountains, behind a wall of shaped sandstone blocks and lime mortar, a passage continues into the hillside. It has been continuing, undisturbed, for however long the barrier has been in place. Breathe now, in and out. The weight of your body is completely supported. There is nothing you need to do. The sixth tunnel is off a coal mine that has been abandoned for over a century. Katoomba has coal. Thin, poor-quality seams of Permian coal that attracted mining interest in the latter half of the 19th century. Several mines operated in the Katoomba area over a period of decades. None of them were particularly successful. The last of the commercial mines closed in the early 20th century. The shafts, adits, and passages of these mines remain. Some are well documented, some are known but not precisely located, and some, according to the accounts of mine historians and the occasional adventurous urban explorer, contain features that do not correspond to what a coal mine should look like. Coal mines follow coal. This is the fundamental organizing principle of underground coal mining. You dig to where the coal is, you follow the seam where it leads. The geometry of a coal mine is the geometry of the coal seam that created it. In several of the old Katoomba mine workings, explorers have reported lateral passages, horizontal passages branching off from the main mine workings at angles that do not correspond to any known coal seam direction. These passages are not small. Some of them extend for distances that would have required significant labor to create, and they appear to have been made with tools and techniques inconsistent with the equipment used in the documented period of mining activity. One account, from an urban explorer who documented a visit in the late 1990s, describes a lateral passage extending southward from the main level of what is believed to be the old Browns Colliery workings for approximately 120 meters before it turns and descends at an angle he found impossible to follow safely alone. The walls of this passage are smoother than the main mine workings and lack the characteristic tool marks left by the hand-boring equipment used in 19th century colonial mining. The floor had been leveled with more care than a functional mine passageway requires. He found two things in this passage that he could not explain. The first was a series of channels cut into the floor, narrow grooves approximately 10 centimeters wide and 5 centimeters deep, running parallel to the passage direction for several meters before stopping. They reminded him of the channels used in ancient hydraulic systems, channels designed to carry water in controlled quantities. The second was a wooden peg, driven into the wall approximately a meter above the floor level, that he gently tested and found to be remarkably solid. He photographed it instead of extracting it. The photograph shows a timber peg in close-up, the grain of the wood visible, the color suggesting old, dry wood rather than fresh timber. In ancient hydraulic distribution systems, channels of this form were used to distribute water in controlled amounts. The precision required to cut such channels, the careful maintenance of gradient, the clean edges, suggests tools and patience. What water was being moved, and from where to where, in a lateral passage off an old coal mine in Katoomba, is a question that the channel cannot answer by itself. It can only sit there, cut into the floor, its gradient suggesting purpose, its precise edges suggesting care. The wooden peg is there to hold something, a lamp, a tool, a length of rope, a piece of equipment whose exact nature cannot be determined from the peg alone. It was put there by someone who needed something to be hung in that specific location, at that specific height, in that specific passage. The specificity is the thing. The channels are specific, the peg is specific. Whatever was happening in that lateral passage was purposeful, and carried out by people who knew what they were doing. The 7th tunnel exists in data from a survey that was never followed up. The Gross Valley is one of the most dramatic landforms in the Blue Mountains. It descends from the plateau edge in sheer sandstone walls of extraordinary height, its floor a tangle of dense temperate rainforest, its river clear and cold and full of the sound of running water. In 1978, a geological survey was commissioned to map the subsurface structure of a section of the Gross Valley for purposes related to water resource assessment. In one particular section of the survey area, the data were not what was expected. At a depth of approximately 30 to 40 meters below the valley floor, the geophysical data indicated a series of voids. Not one void, a series. The pattern of anomalies was described by the survey geophysicist in her technical report as linear, by which she meant that the voids appeared to be arranged in a roughly linear pattern, rather than in the irregular, clustered arrangement that natural cavity systems typically produce. Linear arrangements of underground voids can occur naturally. There are geological processes that can produce roughly linear cave development. The report noted this and did not claim that the anomalies were necessarily unusual. But the geophysicist also noted that the linear direction of the anomaly pattern, when projected on the surface, aligned with a natural drainage feature in a way that seemed worth noting for future investigation. The survey was not extended to investigate the anomaly further. The water resource assessment found what it needed elsewhere, and the anomaly zone was noted for future investigation in the report's recommendations, without becoming the subject of that future investigation in any documented way. The report exists. It is not classified. It was produced for a government agency and exists somewhere in the archives of the relevant successor department, along with the raw data from which the anomaly was identified. What those voids contain, if they contain anything other than empty space, is not known. What created them, in a linear pattern at a depth of 30 to 40 meters, is not definitively established. The Gross Valley, viewed from the rim, is one of the great landscape experiences of eastern Australia. The drop from the plateau edge is sheer, in some sections 300 meters or more of vertical sandstone cliff. Hikers descend into it along steep trails. Birds move through the canyon in patterns that only they fully understand. Below all of this, in the questionable dark at 30 to 40 meters, the anomaly sits, unconfirmed, unexplained, waiting for someone to decide that finding out is worth the effort. You are drifting a little now. The words are becoming softer. The 8th tunnel has a door no one can explain. There is a sandstone cutting near Lawson, on the old Great Western Railway corridor, where the early railway builders left their marks in the stone. Initials, dates, small carvings that represent the modest immortality of working men who knew they would not otherwise be remembered. Less well known is the feature immediately below the cutting, at the base of the sandstone cliff face, concealed now by introduced vegetation that has grown thicker over the decades. It is an arch. The arch is constructed of brick, colonial-era brick, handmade, the kind with slight irregularities in size and surface texture that machine-made brick does not produce. The arch spans approximately 2 meters and stands approximately 1.5 meters high at its crown. It is mortared in place with lime mortar that has suffered significantly from moisture exposure over a long period, but remains structurally adequate. Behind the arch is a passage, and the passage extends, as far as can be determined without careful excavation, for some distance into the hillside. The railway cut through that hillside in 1867. The railway records from the construction period are reasonably complete. Those records contain no reference to the construction of a brick arch in the location where it now exists, which means either the arch predates the railway, or it was constructed during the railway period but was not recorded, or the records that would have documented it have been lost. A local builder named Richard Pascoe, who specializes in historical masonry and who examined the arch in 2003, offered the observation that the brick coursing pattern was consistent with techniques used in the period 1840 to 1860 rather than later periods. He acknowledged that this was a professional assessment based on visual examination rather than laboratory analysis, and was therefore not definitive. What would someone build a brick arch into a hillside for in the 1840s or 1850s in a sparsely settled area along a road corridor in the Blue Mountains? A water storage or management system, and add it into the hillside for some resource assessment purpose. A root cellar or food storage facility associated with a nearby dwelling that no longer exists. A structure built for purposes unknown. Brick is a technology. It requires understanding of clay composition, kiln temperature, firing duration, and cooling rate. The brick that comes out of a well-managed kiln is a remarkably consistent material. Colonial New South Wales had brickmakers from very early in the settlement period. The brick that built early Sydney is still visible in the fabric of the historic city. The brick in the Lawson Arch is consistent with colonial manufacture. What Pascoe could not say with confidence is when in the colonial period. Handmade colonial brick was produced in the Blue Mountains area from the 1820s onward. The technique of handmade brickmaking did not change dramatically across the period, so the brick itself does not resolve the dating question. The location is the most puzzling aspect. An 1840 to 1860 date would place it before the railway and before systematic township development, in a location that had limited European infrastructure. Pascoe has kept the site in mind for many years. He knows where it is and has revisited it occasionally, noting its continuing survival beneath the encroaching vegetation. The arch waits. The 9th tunnel gave up something that nobody expected to find. Springwood sits at the lower eastern end of the Blue Mountains. In 2011, the installation of new water infrastructure required deep excavation across several sections of the town. At a site on Springwood's eastern edge, a trenching operation broke into a void at a depth of approximately 7 meters. The void was not large, perhaps 3 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 1.5 meters high. Its walls were rough sandstone. Its floor was silted, covered with fine sediment that had accumulated over whatever period the void had been sealed. In the sediment, the excavation contractor found 3 ceramic fragments. He recognized that the fragments appeared to be old and brought them to the attention of the council's heritage officer, who called in a museum curator. The curator identified the fragments as belonging to 2 distinct types. 2 of the fragments appeared to be from European-style ceramics of colonial period manufacture, consistent with the 1820 to 1860 period based on the type of clay body and glaze used. This was not surprising. Springwood has a colonial history, and European ceramic debris in the soil is not impossible given the long history of ground modification in the town. The 3rd fragment was different. It was heavier. The clay body was of a different character, more dense, fired at what appeared to be a higher temperature. The glaze, where present, was of a type that the curator did not immediately recognize from Australian colonial material. She described it as resembling, in some technical respects, Chinese export porcelain of a type manufactured from approximately the late 17th century onward and widely traded across maritime Asia. A single ceramic fragment in a disturbed context cannot support far-reaching conclusions. The curator noted all of this in her brief report and did not make any dramatic claims. But she also noted that the fragment was recovered from a sealed sediment deposit within a void that, based on the degree of secondary mineral coating on the void walls, had not been disturbed for a considerable time. And she noted that Chinese ceramic material of the type it appeared to represent was not a common component of colonial Australian archaeological assemblages at any period. Chinese ceramics have a history of extraordinary geographic distribution. From the Song dynasty onward, Chinese export porcelain was carried by maritime trade networks across the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Pacific. They have been found in archaeological contexts in East Africa, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands, in Japan, and Korea. The reach of Chinese ceramic trade in the medieval and early modern period was genuinely global. The presence of Chinese ceramic material in pre-colonial Australian contexts would be, if confirmed, consistent with a hypothesis that has attracted growing attention in maritime history: that contact between maritime Southeast Asia and the Australian continent occurred before European contact. The void was recorded, photographed, and then filled. The infrastructure works could not wait indefinitely. The 3 ceramic fragments were retained. The colonial period ones were catalogued without particular incident. The 3rd fragment was the subject of a brief flurry of museum correspondence, and then placed in storage. It has not been the subject of published analysis. Its current location is the museum storage system, which is large and complex and not entirely navigated in a systematic way. Somewhere in that storage system, a ceramic fragment sits in an archival bag, labeled with its site code and its brief field note, waiting for someone to pick it up and ask the question it raises. The 10th tunnel lies beneath the Megalong Valley, and someone was in it long enough to start counting. The Megalong Valley is accessed from the upper mountains by a steep, winding road that descends from Blackheath into a world that feels very different from the plateau above. It is an agricultural valley, grazed, farmed, dotted with properties that have been in some families for generations. An underground stream runs through the western portion of the valley. In the 1960s, a farmer named James Tyrrell was excavating a dam on his property when his earth-moving equipment broke through into a passage. The passage was approximately 1 meter wide and 1.5 meters high, and carried a small, clear stream. Tyrrell, a practical man who needed a dam rather than an archaeological discovery, considered his options and ultimately backfilled the breach after photographing the passage. His photographs show the passage walls, the stream, and something that he noted at the time, and that subsequent examination of the photographs has not resolved. At the point where the breach occurred, the passage wall on the left side shows what appear to be regular markings, a series of parallel lines cut into the rock, arranged in groups, approximately 40 centimeters above the high water mark of the stream. The photographs are of 1960s quality, black and white, not perfectly focused. The markings are visible but not crisp. Tyrrell described the markings to his neighboring farmers without apparently attaching great significance to them. One of those neighbors, who had some interest in local history, made a note of Tyrrell's account in his personal diary. That diary ended up, decades later, in a regional historical society collection, where it was found by a researcher in the 1990s. The researcher concluded, carefully, with appropriate qualifications, that the markings appeared to be tally marks. The grouping system, sets of lines that appeared to form counting sequences, was consistent with various traditions of tallying that span many cultures and many historical periods. Tally marks are among the oldest forms of human record-keeping. Notched bones that appear to represent systematic counting have been found in archaeological contexts dating back tens of thousands of years. The principle is simple and universal. Make a mark for each unit counted, group the marks for ease of reading, read the marks to recover the total. What were they counting in the cave passage beneath the Megalong Valley? The question is not answerable, but we can think about what underground counting might mean. In mining contexts, tally marks record the output of individual workers. But the Megalong passage carries a stream, and stream passages in karst systems are not typically the locations of mineral extraction. In other contexts, tally marks in caves record time. People sheltering underground in extended stays, during periods of conflict, during ceremonies, during particular kinds of isolation, have marked the passage of time on cave walls. This is documented in various historical periods across various cultures. If the megalong marks are time records, they represent an extended underground stay by someone who needed, or chose, to be in that passage for long enough to require systematic timekeeping. Someone who was in the dark, beside the underground stream, counting days. The stream runs on in the dark beneath the Megalong Valley, past the repaired breach and the backfilled dam, keeping its own count in the language of water over stone, which is a tally that never stops accumulating. The 11th tunnel has a compass that refused to cooperate. Mount Victoria is the highest township in the Blue Mountains. It sits at the edge of the western escarpment, with views that on clear days extend for enormous distances across the plains beyond the range. It is cold in winter and beautiful, and it has a slightly melancholy air that some visitors find oppressive and others find immensely comforting. The feeling of being at the edge of something, at a high place where the weather comes from all directions. In the early 2000s, a retired mining engineer named David Murchison began an informal investigation of the limestone country immediately west of Mount Victoria Township. He was motivated initially by a professional interest in karst geology, and secondarily by a conversation with an elderly resident who claimed, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone recounting something they have personally experienced, that there were rooms under the limestone. The elderly resident, a woman then in her 80s, who had lived in the Mount Victoria area her entire life, described being shown a cave entrance as a child by her grandmother, who told her that the place had been used, in her grandmother's own childhood, by people whose identity she did not specify further than a gesture toward the general direction of long ago. Murchison began a systematic surface survey of the limestone country. He found several cave passages. He explored what he could of the accessible ones, taking careful notes with the methodical thoroughness of an engineer. The compass anomaly occurred approximately 60 meters below the surface, in a section of the cave system he had not yet fully mapped. He noticed that his compass bearing was inconsistent, that the needle, which should have maintained a consistent orientation with respect to magnetic north, was deflecting slightly, and in a direction that changed as he moved through the passage. Magnetic anomalies in cave systems are not unheard of. Certain iron-bearing minerals can produce local magnetic anomalies that affect compass readings. Murchison was aware of this and did not immediately leap to dramatic conclusions. But he was a mining engineer. He had worked around iron-bearing geology for decades. He knew what iron-bearing mineral anomalies looked like in terms of their effect on a compass, and this did not quite fit that pattern. The anomaly was too localized. It occupied a specific section of the passage, rather than showing the gradual onset and offset he would expect from dispersed magnetic minerals. And it was directionally specific. The deflection was consistent in its direction. The needle pulled not randomly but toward a specific bearing, in a way that suggested a concentrated source rather than dispersed mineralogy. He drilled a small core sample from the wall in the anomaly zone and had it analyzed. The analysis found elevated iron content consistent with a magnetite-bearing zone in the sandstone, which is a plausible explanation for the compass anomaly. But the geometry troubled him. The magnetite zone, as identified by the analysis, was not where the compass anomaly was most pronounced. There was a spatial offset between the zone of anomalous compass behavior and the zone of elevated iron content in the wall sample. If the sample accurately represented the distribution of magnetite in the passage wall, the anomaly should be strongest where the magnetite is most concentrated. The fact that it was not implies either that the sample did not accurately represent the magnetite distribution, or that there is an additional source of magnetic anomaly that the sample did not capture. Murchison published a short paper in a speleological journal in 2007. The paper did not draw dramatic conclusions. It simply documented the anomaly, presented the data, and noted that the explanation was not straightforward. A mining engineer who has spent a career underground develops a very particular relationship with the tools they depend on. The compass is not the most sophisticated instrument in a modern mining engineer's toolkit, but it remains a useful check instrument. When that trust was violated, when the compass told him something that did not correspond to his understanding of where he was and what direction he was facing, he did not dismiss the instrument. He paid attention to it. An anomaly that is reproducible is an anomaly that is real. The Mount Victoria compass anomaly is a property of a specific section of a cave passage. Something at that location produces a local magnetic field strong enough to affect a compass needle. What exactly and why the spatial offset exists remains unresolved. Murchison retired from his investigation. His health limited his ability to continue the physical work of cave exploration. The cave passage at Mount Victoria maintains its magnetic secret. Your breath is very slow now. Your body is entirely still. The compass needle swings slightly, finds no north that satisfies it, settles on a direction that is no direction at all, and rests. The 12th tunnel connects the ground beneath you to something carved in stone above it. Evans Crown is a significant Aboriginal cultural site in the Blue Mountains, a granite outcrop covered with rock engravings that represent one of the most substantial collections of such art in New South Wales. It is an important and protected place. One aspect of the Evans Crown engravings has attracted quiet attention from a small number of researchers who work at the intersection of archaeology and landscape studies. Certain of the geometric engravings, a subset of the markings, appear, when examined in context of the landscape around Evans Crown, to follow a spatial logic that some researchers have interpreted as directional. The suggestion, offered as a suggestion, not a conclusion, is that some of the geometric markings may function as landscape indicators, markers that encode information about the physical environment, including subsurface features. This is not a novel idea in the study of Aboriginal cultural practices. There is documented evidence in other regions of Australia of landscape knowledge being encoded in visual traditions. And underground water sources, cave systems, and resource locations have significance in various Aboriginal cultural and practical traditions. The researchers who have noted this pattern at Evans Crown have been careful to say that they cannot interpret the markings themselves. Interpretation requires cultural knowledge that they do not possess, and it would be inappropriate to claim interpretive authority they do not have. What they have observed and documented and published in cautious terms is that the spatial arrangement of certain markings seems to correspond with subsurface geological features identified by independent geophysical survey. The relationship between visible landscape markings and subsurface knowledge is a topic that has attracted growing attention in archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology, disciplines that study the ways in which human communities have encoded knowledge of their environment in spatial arrangements and markings. The mapping of songlines, the routes across the landscape that carry narrative and knowledge in the Aboriginal tradition, has shown that this tradition encodes precise geographic information across enormous distances. Elder knowledge holders who have been involved in various heritage and land management processes in the Blue Mountains region have occasionally noted, in contexts that have been publicly documented, that specific underground features are known in community memory. What is publicly available is the general acknowledgement, from within the communities who hold the knowledge, that the underground landscape of the Blue Mountains is not unmapped in the Indigenous tradition. It is mapped in a different kind of map, one that is carried in memory and song and story, rather than in paper and ink, but it is not unknown. This is not a mystery in the sense of being unexplained. It is a mystery in the older sense, a sacred thing, a thing that belongs to those who hold the keys to its meaning. It is offered here as a reminder that the landscape we have been exploring tonight has a depth of human connection that long predates the colonial period, and that the questions we have been asking are in some ways the newest and shallowest layer of inquiry into a very old relationship between people and the underground world. The 13th tunnel appears in 8 words of a journal written in 1813. Gregory Blaxland, William Lawson, and William Charles Wentworth crossed the Blue Mountains in 1813, following the ridge lines rather than attempting to descend into the valleys that had defeated previous European attempts to find a route through the range. Their crossing is famous. There is a highway named for it. The 3 men are commemorated in the names of townships along the route they followed. Blaxland kept a journal. On the 5th day of the crossing, it records an incident that is less well remembered than the broader achievement. One member of the party, a convict servant, descended from the ridge to investigate a sound that Blaxland describes as resembling running water, with the practical motivation of assessing whether a reliable water source was accessible. The servant returned after approximately 2 hours. Blaxland writes that the man was disturbed. The servant reported finding a water source, but also reported finding what Blaxland summarizes as a place where others have been before us, without elaborating further in the entry. Subsequent entries in the Blaxland Journal do not return to this incident. A place where others have been before us, not evidence that others have been. The place. As though what the servant found was itself a kind of structure, a made thing or a marked thing or a shaped thing, that announced prior human presence by its form rather than by the debris of occupation. The convict servant's name was later established by a historian who cross-referenced the party roster with the journal entries. He was a man named Thomas Fenwick, transported for a property crime in England, who subsequently became a free man by grant and lived a long, unremarkable life in the colony. The 1813 crossing is one of those events in Australian history that has been told and retold until the telling has acquired a certain smoothness, a heroic narrative with clear structure and unambiguous significance. The retelling tends to emphasize the achievement and the subsequent consequences, rather than the texture of the experience itself. What it was actually like to be in that party, on those ridges, with those convict servants and those pack horses, is harder to recover from the documentary record. And yet, Thomas Fenwick, the convict who went down the slope and found whatever he found, was sent as an individual agent, trusted, at least provisionally, to investigate and report back. His report was taken seriously enough to record. His agitation was noted. His discretion was apparently relied upon. He could not have anticipated that his brief experience, a few minutes in an underground space that he tried to describe to his employer, who summarized it in 8 words, would be the subject of discussion more than 2 centuries later. He could not have anticipated that people in the comfortable future would lie in warm beds, thinking about the sound of his footsteps in an underground passage on a ridgeline, day in 1813. Thomas Fenwick lived into the 1850s. He would have been an old man by then, having spent the majority of his adult life in the colony that transported him. He may have read accounts of the crossing in the newspapers. He may have seen Blaxland's name in print. Whether he ever told anyone what he found on the 5th day, his family, his neighbors, a friend in a moment of intimacy, is not recorded. Whatever Fenwick saw, it passed from the world with him. The 14th tunnel announces itself through the air. There is a phenomenon that experienced bushwalkers in the Blackheath area of the Blue Mountains have described for many years without being able to explain. In certain locations, particularly in certain gullies and on certain slope aspects on the eastern escarpment below Blackheath, the air temperature drops significantly and abruptly as you walk through a particular zone. Not the gradual temperature change you would expect from elevation or aspect or shade, a sudden, notable change, as though someone has left a door open to a cold room. Locals call these cold zones various names: cold spots, air vents, the breath of the mountain. None of these names are official. They represent the informal vocabulary that develops when a community lives alongside an unexplained phenomenon for long enough that it needs naming. The phenomenon is real. It has been measured. A small, informal research project conducted by a geography teacher from Blackheath High School in the early 2000s involved students carrying simple temperature loggers on bushwalks in the escarpment country below the town. The data collected showed clear, reproducible temperature anomalies at specific locations. Temperature drops of 5 to 8 degrees Celsius occurring over horizontal distances of less than 20 meters. The obvious explanation is the emergence of cave air, cool, stable, underground air emerging from a cave entrance or a large crack or fissure. Cave air in the Blue Mountains, in the deeper parts of cave systems, maintains a relatively constant temperature approximately equal to the mean annual surface air temperature, which is in the range of 12 to 14 degrees Celsius in the Blackheath area. On a warm day, this underground air, emerging at the surface, would feel significantly cooler than the ambient air temperature. Cave exits are known to produce exactly this effect. Stand outside the entrance to any substantial cave on a warm day, and you will feel the breath of the mountain, cool, slightly damp, with the mineral smell of deep rock. The interesting question is, where are the cave entrances or fissures that produce the cold zones below Blackheath? They have not been definitively identified. The escarpment below Blackheath is steep, vegetated, difficult terrain. The teacher's research project mapped the cold zone locations, but was not resourced to conduct a systematic search for the source features in the difficult terrain above and beyond them. What is notable is that the cold zones appear to correspond, when mapped, with a roughly linear pattern on the escarpment. the same escarpment beneath which, if you project the subsurface, the Gross Valley geophysical anomaly from 1978 would be located. This is a speculative connection. The survey data is too coarse for precise spatial comparison. The cold zone mapping is informal, but cool air has to come from somewhere. And somewhere, beneath the Blackheath escarpment, there is a system extensive enough and well-connected enough to maintain a temperature regime that produces measurable cold zones at the surface. How extensive? How deep? How connected? The mountain breathes and does not say. The steady temperature of the deep underground is one of the more remarkable geological facts. At sufficient depth, below the zone of seasonal temperature variation, the rock maintains a temperature approximately equal to the mean annual surface temperature of the location. This temperature constancy has been exploited by humans throughout history. Underground spaces in many parts of the world were used as food storage, the consistent cool temperature preserving perishables more effectively than anything available at the surface before refrigeration. Wine cellars, root cellars, ice cellars, all applications of the same principle. People who have lived in a place for a long time, generations, centuries, millennia, develop a familiarity with its sensory character that goes beyond the map. They know where the cold spots are. They know which gullies hold cold air longer in the morning. They know the landscape through their bodies as well as through their intellects. The specific cold air zones below Blackheath were not a discovery of the geography teacher's students in the early 2000s. They were features of a landscape that had been inhabited and known for thousands of years. Whether those features and the underground systems that produced them were known in traditional knowledge in specific rather than general terms, that is something that only the communities who hold that knowledge can say. The mountain breathes. It knows itself very well. The 15th tunnel is the deepest, and it runs beneath the most famous cave destination in the Blue Mountains. Jenolan Caves has been a tourist attraction since the 1860s. Its great chambers, their formations carefully lit, their paths smoothed for comfortable walking, have received millions of visitors. The guided cave tours at Jenolan are among the most popular natural heritage tourism experiences in Australia. But Jenolan Caves is also a working scientific site, and the portion of the system that has been developed for tourism represents only a fraction of the known cave passages. Beyond the lit accessible sections, there is a great deal more cave, and beyond what is known, there is, necessarily, more cave again. In the hydrology of the system, there is a section that the cavers who know Jenolan well refer to informally as the River Styx section, a reach of the underground stream that drains a portion of the system where access has been persistently difficult. The difficulty is partly physical, the water level. The River Styx section has stretches where the stream passage is sumped, meaning the water fills the passage from floor to ceiling, requiring diving equipment and significant experience for access. Dry periods partially lower the water level and open some sections, but full exploration has been limited by the technical demands. What the divers who have penetrated the River Styx section report is a passage that, beyond the sump sections they have been able to traverse, continues in ways that are not consistent with the geology as understood from the surface and from the accessible sections of the cave. The passage directions change. The geometry implies a connection to a surface drainage feature that has not been identified on the surface. The scale of the passage, in certain sections, is larger than would be predicted from the catchment area it drains. One diver, who explored a particularly remote section in the late 1990s, submitted a report to the Cave Management Authority in which she noted, among other technical observations, that in one section of the submerged passage she had found what she described as worked stone that appeared to have been shaped rather than broken by natural process, partially embedded in the streambed sediment. The report was filed. The observation was noted. The diver acknowledged that submerged cave environments are challenging contexts for assessment. The water distorts vision, the current moves sediment, the lighting is limited to what the diver carries. She was not certain of what she had seen. She was certain enough to include it in an official report. Cave divers work in an environment where normal rules of perception are modified. Visibility is limited by the beam of the dive light, which creates a moving pool of visibility in an otherwise complete dark. Objects seen through water at depth may appear different in size, shape, and surface texture from how they appear in air. The diver knew all of this and accounted for it in her qualifications, and she still wrote, "worked stone," because that is what she saw. She never had the opportunity to return to that specific section with the enhanced equipment that might have resolved the question, because the hydrology of the system subsequently shifted and the section became inaccessible. Whether work stone lies in the streambed of the River Styx, beneath the oldest tourist cave destination in the Blue Mountains, is not known. Whether it would, if confirmed, represent pre-European human presence in that section of the cave system is a question with significant implications for the archaeology of the region and the history of human occupation in the Blue Mountains. It is a question that the river asks, running in the dark, over whatever lies in its bed, patient as water is always patient, which is to say, endlessly so. Jenolan Caves has been visited by European Australians since the 1830s. The early visitors were not tourists in any modern sense. They were explorers, settlers, people passing through the mountains for practical reasons who took a detour to see the caves that local Aboriginal people had known about far longer. The caves became a formal tourist attraction in the 1860s, and by the end of the 19th century, they were one of the most visited natural sites in the colony. All of this visibility, all of this attention, all of this documentation, and still, the River Styx section remains incompletely explored. The hydrology of the system, which determines where water is and how deep it is at any given time, controls access. Somewhere in the future, a diver will re-enter the section that was inaccessible after the hydrology shifted. The water will be at the right level. The visibility will be adequate. The lighting will illuminate the stream bed at the right angle. And whatever is down there, the thing that the 1990s diver wrote about in her careful report, will either still be there or will not. If it is there, the question will finally be able to be examined in better conditions. If it is not, the question will remain open, a single observer's account, carefully made, that subsequent investigation could neither confirm nor refute. The Jenolan system holds its deepest passages in complete, patient dark. The water moves through it, the formations continue their geological scale growth. The River Styx keeps running toward whatever it runs toward, in the country below the country, in the underground world that underlies and underlies and underlies. And so we come to the end of our descent. 15 passages, 15 mysteries, 15 places where history pauses at the edge of the dark and admits that it does not know what is down there. The Blue Mountains are very old. The sandstone of the cliffs was laid down in the Triassic period, more than 200 million years ago, from the sediments of rivers and deltas that no longer exist in any recognizable form. The limestone formations into which caves develop were laid down earlier still. The forces that lifted these ancient sediments into a plateau and then carved the canyons and valleys were working long before anything human walked across them. Into this old landscape, humans came, at least 65,000 years ago, likely more, in the best current understanding of Australian prehistory. They came with fire and song and knowledge systems of extraordinary sophistication, and they learned the landscape in ways that the European tradition of understanding is only beginning to appreciate. They knew the underground as they knew everything else, as part of a country that was alive and related and full of meaning. Into this old landscape later, European settlers came and imposed their own frameworks of understanding. They built roads and railways and towns. They mined and surveyed and mapped. They filed reports and kept journals and sent letters. Their understanding was different in character from what preceded it, but it was not careless. The engineers and geologists and surveyors of the colonial period were often diligent and precise, and their records, where they survive, are genuinely useful. And into all of this, the ancient geology, the long Aboriginal occupation, the colonial enterprise, there fall the gaps, the unexplained carvings, the sealed passages, the compass anomalies, the cold air emerging from sources no one has found, the ceramic fragment in the void, the worked stone in the underwater dark. Gaps are not failures of understanding. They are invitations. They are the places where knowledge is still being made, where the question is still more important than the answer, where the honest response to the evidence is to say, we don't know yet. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that the kind of thing that makes the world feel larger rather than smaller, more interesting rather than more settled? The Blue Mountains will keep their secrets for as long as they choose. They are very old and very patient, and not at all in a hurry. You are not in a hurry either. Your breath is slow and even. The night is deep. The tunnels are far away, in the sandstone dark, in the limestone quiet, in the cool underground where the temperature is constant and the formations grow at the rate of a centimeter per century, and time is measured in geological increments rather than in the human scale of days and years and lifetimes. Let your thoughts go quiet now. Let the questions rest. The mysteries have waited this long and will wait a little longer. They are patient teachers, the unexplained places beneath the mountains. They do not demand answers. They only ask that you remain curious. Perhaps in your dream, you will find the 47 characters in the Hartley Vale limestone and find that you can read them, just for a moment, just in the deep place where dream knowledge lives before it dissolves at waking. Perhaps you will find the barrier in the Lura cave and understand, in the dream logic way of knowing without explanation, why it was built from the inside. Perhaps you will stand in the Jenolan River Styx and look down through the clear, cold water and see the worked stone in the stream bed and know, without anyone having to tell you, who shaped it and when and why. Or perhaps you will simply sleep. Deeply and well, the weight of the mountains settled gently over you like a very old blanket, the breath of the underground moving softly through your dreams, the mysteries keeping their comfortable silence all around you. The blue mountains breathe. You breathe with them. The tunnels are quiet. The night is long. Sleep now. Sleep. There is a particular quality to the blue mountains at night that you cannot fully understand until you have been there after dark, away from the townships, in the open bush on the plateau edge. The eucalyptus trees do not look the same at night. In daylight, they are silver gray and rust red and pale ochre, their bark peeling in long strips, their canopies gray-green and slightly dusty looking in the dry season. At night, they become darker presences, shapes against a sky that, away from the light pollution of the city, is extraordinary in its depth and clarity. The Milky Way is visible over the Blue Mountains in a way that most city dwellers have never seen it. Not a faint suggestion, but a dense, complex river of light from one horizon to the other. The stars over the Blue Mountains are ancient light. Most of what you can see in the night sky is light that has been traveling for years or decades or centuries before reaching your eyes. Some of the stars visible on a clear Blue Mountains night no longer exist. They burned out while their light was still in transit, and what you see is a message from something that has ended, still arriving, still crossing the enormous void between where it began and where it lands, here, in your retinas, on this particular night. The tunnels are below. The stars are above. And you are in between on the thin, living surface of the world for the brief duration of a human life. This is not a sad thought. It is the most clarifying thought there is. The immensity of time and space does not diminish you. It contains you. You are part of it, a brief, particular, completely unrepeatable part of it. The 47 characters in the Hartley Vale limestone were carved by someone who is also a brief, particular, unrepeatable part of the immensity. They left their mark in the limestone, and their mark has outlasted everything else about them. Their name, their face, the sound of their voice, the particular way they moved through the world. All of that is gone, and the 47 characters remain. You will leave your marks in the world, in one form or another. You already have. The marks may not be carved in limestone, they may not persist for centuries, but they are real, and they have their own kind of weight and presence, and they are yours. For now, the mark you are making is this. You are resting. You are allowing your body and mind the restoration they need. You are treating yourself with the same patient care that limestone treats water, receiving it, slowly, over a long time, and letting it do what it needs to do. Sleep is what it needs to do. Let it. The mountains are standing in the dark, very old and very patient. The underground is doing what it always does, being dark and cool and quiet and full of the slow accumulations of time. The stars are completing their long journeys across the void and landing somewhere on the earth with their ancient light. You are here. You are resting. You are exactly where you need to be. The night holds you. The world holds you. The same forces that shaped the Blue Mountains over hundreds of millions of years are the forces that shaped you. The slow, patient work of physics and chemistry and time, creating something specific and particular and never to be repeated out of the universal materials. You are a Blue Mountains of a kind. You have your own tunnels, your own unexplored passages, your own mysteries that have not been fully mapped and may never be. This is not a deficit. This is the nature of complex things. They contain more than can be fully known, more than can be fully reached, more than any one investigation can exhaust. The unexplored passages are not a problem to be solved. They are a promise that there is always more, always depth, always the invitation to go a little further if you choose, when the conditions are right. Tonight, the conditions are for rest, not exploration. Tonight, the passages can wait. They will wait. They are very good at waiting. Breathe. In and out. The temperature of the underground is constant, 12 to 14 degrees Celsius, steady through summer and winter, unaffected by the weather at the surface, unaware of whether the surface world is experiencing drought or flood, heat or cold. Find that temperature in yourself now, the part of you that is steady and constant beneath the weather of your daily life. The part that does not vary with what happened today or what might happen tomorrow. The part that is, in the most fundamental sense, simply and completely you. That part knows how to rest. That part has been resting, in a certain sense, all your life. Maintaining itself, steady as the underground temperature, while the surface part of you went about the work and the worry and the wonder of being alive. Give the surface part a rest now. Let it lay down the day and the worry and the wonder and the questions. Let it join the deep part, which is already at rest, already steady, already maintaining itself quietly in the dark. The tunnels are in the mountains. The quiet is in you. Sleep. If you are still here, still at the surface of sleep, not quite under, here are the softest possible words to carry you the rest of the way down. The Blue Mountains were not always mountains. Once they were a seafloor, then they were uplifted, then they were eroded, then they were carved into the shapes we know now, the cliffs and the valleys and the plateau edge and the escarpments that fall away to the plains. Every step of this happened slowly, impossibly slowly by any human scale of time. The seafloor became sedimentary rock over millions of years. The uplifting happened over millions of years more. The erosion is still happening. The mountains are being slowly lowered by the same forces that created them, the rain and the wind and the frost wedging of winter ice in cracks, taking the rock apart grain by grain and carrying it toward the ocean. In another 100 million years, the Blue Mountains will be lower, different, perhaps unrecognizable. The escarpments will have retreated further west. The valleys will be wider and shallower. The cliffs that are currently hundreds of meters high will be reduced by the patient work of water and time. And in whatever form the landscape takes, the rocks at the base of the geological sequence, the oldest rocks, the deep basement under everything, will still be there. Changed perhaps, but there. The oldest material, persisting through all the transformations of the surface. You are made of old material. The atoms in your body are ancient, forged in the interiors of stars that died before the sun existed, scattered across the universe in stellar explosions, gathered by gravity into the cloud of material that became the solar system, incorporated into the accretion disk that became the planets, cycled through the geology and biology of the Earth for billions of years, assembled into the specific and unrepeatable configuration that is you. You are old material in a new configuration. The mountains are old material in their current configuration. Both of you are resting, in your respective ways, in the deep of the night. The stars continue overhead. The underground continues below. And here, in between, in the thin and living and luminous zone where humans exist and sleep and dream and wake. Here is where you are. Here is where the night holds you. Here is where rest comes. Let it come. Let it come. Let it come all the way in, the way the cool underground air comes through a fissure in the rock, not rushed, not forced, but finding its way through because that is what it does. Because the differential between inside and outside, between the cool depth and the warm surface, draws it gently through. The differential between where you are and where sleep is draws you gently through. Gently through. The blue mountains are there. The tunnels are there. The 47 characters wait in their patient limestone. The underground stream runs over the tally marks in the megalong dark. The cool air moves through the Bell Range passages. The compass needle rests on its indeterminate north. And you rest here. Resting. Rested. Drifting. Still. Quiet. Held. Warm. Complete. Sleep. There is something else the Blue Mountains hold that we have not yet mentioned, and it can be said in almost no words at all. In the collections of a Blue Mountains Historical Society, there's a photograph, undated and unattributed, showing the entrance to a passage in a sandstone cliff face. Written on the back of the photograph, in a handwriting that has not been matched to any known historical figure, is a single sentence. It goes all the way through. Where the photograph was taken, what the passage is, whether it was ever documented beyond this single image, is not known. The photograph sits in the collection, waiting for someone to recognize the rock face. It goes all the way through. Through to where, no one knows. Through the sandstone, through the hillside, through to the other side of whatever it passes through. A passage that goes all the way through. Somewhere in the Blue Mountains, in the sandstone, beneath the eucalyptus and the ferns and the long views to the western plains, a passage goes all the way through. What is on the other side, no one has said. The photograph waits. The passage waits. You are almost through yourself now. Almost through the border between waking and sleep. Almost through to the other side of consciousness, where the dreams begin and the day finally, fully releases you. Go all the way through. The other side is rest. The other side is quiet. The other side is the deep, restorative, complete sleep that your body has been asking for since long before tonight. Go all the way through. The mountains will be there when you come back. The tunnels will be there. The questions will be there. All of it patient. All of it waiting. All of it as it was and as it will be, in the quiet, cool, geological dark. Good night. Sleep well. The world is full of questions, and that is a very good thing, and none of them need answering tonight. Good night. There's something that happens to the human mind in the late hours of the night that does not happen at any other time. The filters come down. The noise of the day, the obligations, the small frustrations, the running tallies of what was done and what remains undone, all of it loosens its hold. And in that loosening, a certain quality of attention becomes available. An attention that is slower and softer and more willing to sit with things that don't resolve. The Blue Mountains are a good companion for that kind of attention. They are not a landscape that rushes to conclusions. The sandstone cliffs do not announce themselves with the dramatic suddenness of mountains that were formed by recent tectonic activity. They arrived at their current form through a long and patient process of erosion, of water finding the weak lines in the rock, of frost working into the cracks in winter, of gravity pulling the loosened pieces downward over immense periods of time. The cliffs are the result of what was taken away, not what was built up. They are the negative space left by the patient removal of what used to be there. This is, in a certain sense, how all significant things are formed, not by addition, but by removal, not by accumulation, but by the patient taking away of everything that isn't the essential thing, until what remains is clear and distinct and real. Sleep is like that. Sleep is not something you add to your day. It is something that happens when you remove everything else. The waking awareness, the voluntary control of your body, the monitoring and managing and responding that consciousness performs continuously and tirelessly during the day. When all of that is removed, what remains is the sleeping self, which is a different kind of self, less defined, less bounded, more available to the deep processes of restoration and consolidation and dreaming. The mountains know something about this removal. They have been removing themselves, in a sense, for a very long time. And what the removal has revealed over the millions of years of the erosion process, is both the dramatic surface landscape and the underground landscape that the surface conceals, the passages and chambers and streams that exist in the rock because the rock has been partially removed, dissolved, rearranged by the patient work of water and time. You are in the process of removing the day from yourself. The conversations, the decisions, the small accumulated weight of having been awake and active and responsible. All of it loosening now. All of it finding its way toward the perimeter of your awareness, where it will wait patiently until morning. The 15 tunnels are in the perimeter too. The 47 characters and the 7 river stones and the barrier built from the inside and the compass needle that would not settle. All of them have receded to the edge of the dark, where the questions live in their patient, comfortable way. You are at the center now, the still center, the part of you that does not change with the weather of your circumstances. Rest there. The underground has its own acoustics. Sound travels differently in rock than in air. The velocity of sound in sandstone is approximately 3,000 meters per second, more than 8 times the velocity of sound in air. In limestone, it is even faster. In dense crystalline rock, faster still. This means that sound generated at one point in a rock mass arrives at another point much more quickly than sound traveling through the air between the same 2 points. It means that the rock is, in a certain sense, more connected acoustically than the air above it, that vibrations propagate through the solid material with a speed and efficiency that the fluid medium of air cannot match. The underground is not silent. It is full of the sounds that travel through rock, the distant drip of water, the minute cracking of rock under thermal stress, the low-frequency vibrations of the wind above translated into the solid language of the stone. Creatures that live underground, the invertebrates of the cave ecosystem, the microbial communities of the rock itself, are embedded in this acoustic environment in ways that surface creatures are not. And beneath the Blue Mountains, the 15 passages and chambers carry their own sounds. The underground stream in the Megalong Valley, audible above its tally marks on the cave wall. The steady movement of air through the Bell Range passages, a low and continuous note. The silence of the Lura Cave beyond its sealed barrier. A silence that is different from ordinary silence, being the silence of a sealed space, the silence of something that has not been disturbed, which is a more complete and more final kind of quiet than the silence of the outdoors. You are hearing none of these sounds directly. They are too distant and too deep for your ears to reach, but the rock carries them, faithfully, in the precise language of vibration through solid material, and they propagate outward through the stone in all directions, diminishing but not ceasing, traveling through the basement of the continent in the language of the geological. Your heartbeat is a sound that travels through the solid material of your body. The sound of blood moving through the chambers of your heart is conducted through your ribcage and your sternum and your spine, transmitted to whatever surface you are resting against. The surface transmits it further, in its own diminished way. You are connected to the rock, acoustically, through the chain of transmission that connects all solid materials. The tally marks and the 47 characters and the worked stone in the river Styx are connected to you through the same chain. Not directly, not usefully, but genuinely. The rock carries everything. It has been carrying everything for a very long time. Let the rock carry you now. Let the solid foundation of the world do what it has always done. Hold things up. Transmit vibrations faithfully. Persist through the changes of the surface with the extraordinary patience that only very old and very dense things can achieve. You are held. You are transmitted. You persist. Sleep. The Blue Mountains receive approximately 1,000 millimeters of rainfall per year. This is enough to sustain the remarkable diversity of plant communities that cover the plateau and the escarpment slopes. The dry sclerophyll forest on the exposed ridgelines, the moist sclerophyll forest on the protected slopes, the cool temperate rainforest in the sheltered gully bottoms where the tree ferns grow to 3 meters in height and the air is permanently damp. Of the 1,000 millimeters that falls each year, a significant proportion enters the ground. It percolates through the thin soils of the plateau, through the jointed sandstone beneath, and eventually reaches the water table, the level below which the rock is saturated with water. In the limestone country, it enters the karst system, dissolving slightly as it goes, carrying infinitesimal amounts of calcium carbonate in solution. Over millions of years, this dissolved material is redeposited in the cave systems, as stalactites hanging from cave ceilings, as stalagmites growing from cave floors, as the flowstone sheets that cover walls and floors in smooth, translucent layers. The redeposition rate is extremely slow. A stalactite that is a meter long took tens of thousands of years to grow. A stalactite that was 1 centimeter long when the 47 characters were carved in the Hartley Vale limestone passage has grown, in the time since, by an amount measured in fractions of a millimeter. The cave formations are essentially frozen by human scales of time in the moment they existed when the characters were carved. They are witnesses of a kind, not conscious witnesses, but physical witnesses, present at the moment of the carving, still present now, unchanged in any meaningful way, still holding the same relationship to the carved wall that they held then. If you could read stalactites the way you can read tree rings, if the annual layers of calcium carbonate deposition encoded readable time, you could find out precisely when the characters were carved. The chemistry of cave formation does encode time in various ways, and the techniques of speleothem dating, the dating of cave formations, have become increasingly sophisticated. Whether the stalactites in the Hartley Vale passage have been subjected to this kind of analysis is not known. The formations grow, the characters wait. The water percolates downward from the surface, carrying its dissolved mineral cargo, slowly building the patient record of the cave. And you are up here, above all of it, in the warm, breathing the surface air with its oxygen and its moisture and its faint mineral scent that is, if you pay attention, not entirely unlike the scent of deep rock. Breathe it in. The air that has been over the mountains, through the forest, among the wet ferns in the gully bottoms. The air that has passed over the openings of the underground, carrying with it the faintest signature of the cool world below. Breathe it in. Let it out slowly. The underground is right there, just below the surface, much closer than the stars, which are also there, above you, ancient and patient, and carrying their light across enormous distances to reach you on this particular night. You are in between. You are exactly in between. This is the right place to sleep. Water underground moves in ways that water on the surface does not. On the surface, water follows the topography. It flows downhill, following the gradient of the land, collecting in valleys and rivers, eventually reaching the sea. The path is determined by the surface shape of the landscape, and the surface shape of the landscape is what you see when you look around. Underground, the path of water is determined by the shape of the void space, the passages and joints and fractures and pores through which the water can move. This void space has its own geometry, which may be completely unrelated to the surface topography above it. Underground water can move in directions that appear, from the surface, to be uphill. It can travel considerable distances through the rock before emerging at a spring or seep that is nowhere near the point where it entered the ground. This disconnection between surface and underground is one of the reasons that underground water systems are difficult to map without direct investigation. You cannot look at the surface and deduce with certainty what is happening below. You can make educated guesses based on the geology, but the actual paths of underground water frequently surprise the people who investigate them. The Jenolan cave system is a good example. The underground drainage of the Jenolan system does not follow a simple pattern that mirrors the surface topography. It connects features that are, on the surface, separated by ridges and valleys. The underground connections create a hydraulic network that is, in a sense, a different landscape. A landscape defined by the void space in the rock rather than by the rock itself. The 15 mysteries we have explored tonight are, in a certain way, features of this underground landscape, things that exist in the void space, in the parts of the rock that are absent rather than present. The passages and chambers and stream courses are the spaces where rock is not. They are defined by absence. There is something deeply appealing about the idea of a landscape defined by absence. A landscape that exists because something was removed, by water, by dissolution, by whatever force created the passages that have been carved from inside, or sealed with barriers, or filled with the sound of counting. The underground landscape of the Blue Mountains is the landscape of removal, of patient taking away, of what remains when the solid has been dissolved or displaced. And in those absences, the evidence of human presence, The characters carved into limestone, the smooth river stones arranged on a prepared floor, the barrier built from the interior, the tally marks above the waterline, the worked stone in the stream bed. All of this is evidence of humans choosing to be in the absence, choosing to enter the void, choosing to spend time in the space defined by what is not there. Humans have always done this. The cave art of Chauvet and Lascaux was made in the deepest accessible parts of those caves, not in the entrances, not in the transitional zones, but in the parts that required the most effort to reach, the parts that were most completely removed from the outside world. The people who made that art chose the most complete absence they could access. Perhaps there is something in the human constitution that seeks the absence as a counterweight to the overwhelming presence of the surface world, the light, the noise, the constant stimulation, the social demands, the necessity of orientation and response. The underground offers a complete break from all of that. It offers the dark and the quiet and the constant temperature and the removal of the horizon, which is, in a certain sense, the removal of the future. You cannot see far in a cave, cannot see what is coming, cannot monitor the approaches of whatever might approach. In the underground, there is only now. The immediate space of the cave, the immediate reality of the body in the cool dark. The past is everywhere around you, in the formations and the rock, but the future is simply absent. There is no horizon to monitor. There is no weather coming. Perhaps this is what the people with the tally marks and the carved characters and the arranged river stones were seeking, at least in part. The removal of the horizon, the complete presence of the present moment. You have the present moment too, right here in your warm and horizontal stillness. No horizon to monitor, nothing coming. The Blue Mountains and their underground are far away. The night is your cave. The quiet is complete. Sleep. One last thing. There is a spring on the western slope of the Blue Mountains, below Blackheath, that emerges from the base of a sandstone cliff face in a location that is not easy to reach. It requires a descent through dense vegetation on a steep slope with no formal track. The spring produces a small but reliable flow of cold, clear water that the local bushwalking community knows about and uses as a water source on the long routes through the escarpment country. The water at this spring is cold, colder than you would expect from a surface spring fed by recent rainfall. It has the temperature of deep cave water, which is to say the temperature of the mean annual air temperature at depth, which is several degrees cooler than the average summer air temperature. The water at this spring has been traveling underground for a long time. It entered the surface somewhere on the plateau above, percolated downward through the sandstone, and followed the path of least resistance through the rock until it reached the surface again here, at this cliff face, emerging as a spring. How long the water traveled underground before emerging, nobody knows exactly. Groundwater residence times in deep sandstone systems can be measured in decades or centuries. The water at the Blackheath Spring may have entered the rock before you were born. It may have entered the rock before your parents were born. It has been traveling in the dark beneath the plateau for a very long time, and now it emerges here, cold and clear, into the daylight. It carries nothing from the underground but its temperature and its mineral chemistry. It does not carry messages. It does not carry evidence of the passages it traveled through. It arrives at the surface as water arrives at the surface, clean, cold, present, ready to be used. You are like that water in a certain way. The sleep you are about to enter is a kind of underground passage, a time of moving through the dark, below the surface of consciousness, following the paths that your biology has prepared for you. You will emerge from it in the morning, cold and clear and ready, carrying nothing from the underground but the restoration it provides. The passage is ready for you. The spring is waiting at the other end. Go into the dark. Travel through the rock. Emerge in the morning, restored. The Blue Mountains will be there when you wake. The sandstone cliffs, the eucalyptus forest, the long views to the west. The trails descending into the valleys where the tree ferns grow and the air is cold and damp and full of the smell of old stone. The underground will be there too. The 47 characters in the limestone, the 7 river stones in the dark, the barrier sealed from within, the compass needle resting on its undecided bearing. the tally marks above the waterline of the megalong stream, the worked stone in the river Styx, all of it patient, all of it exactly as it was, all of it waiting, without urgency, without expectation, without the faintest concern about whether it is ever understood or explained or mapped or named. The world is very large and very patient. You are very small and very loved. Sleep. Good night. The sandstone of the Blue Mountains was once sand. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The cliffs that define the landscape, the sheer walls of Govet's Leap, the columns of the Three Sisters, the long escarpment above the Gross Valley, were, hundreds of millions of years ago, rivers of sand. Sand deposited by ancient rivers and ancient deltas. Sand that accumulated in layers over millions of years, buried by more sand, compressed by the weight of what lay above it, bound together by minerals precipitating from the groundwater moving through it until the grains fused into rock. The rock remembers being sand in the way that all things remember what they were, in the texture of its surface, in the way it breaks, along the bedding planes that record each separate episode of deposition, each new layer of sand arriving and settling on the layer below. In the fossils of ripple marks on the undersides of certain layers, the preserved record of water moving over sand in shallow, ancient rivers, frozen in stone at the moment when the sand became rock. The passages that move through this rock are moving through compressed time. The walls of the Hartley Vale Passage are walls made of the record of ancient rivers. The floor of the Bell Range passages is the floor of an ancient depositional sequence. The ceiling of the sealed chamber at Lura is the ceiling made of what was once sand blowing in the wind or settling in shallow water before any human being existed. The 47 characters were carved into a wall of compressed ancient time. Whoever carved them was pressing their tools into the record of rivers that flowed before mammals existed. The characters exist at the intersection of the geological and the human, at the place where the immense scale of geological time meets the brief urgency of a human being who had something to say and set it in stone. This intersection is everywhere in the Blue Mountains. The human history of the range, the Aboriginal history of tens of thousands of years, the colonial history of 2 centuries, is all inscribed on a landscape that is itself inscribed with a much deeper history. The human marks are the most recent marks. They are the least permanent in geological terms. They will be eroded and dissolved and buried and removed far sooner than the bedding planes and the fossil ripple marks. But they are the marks that carry meaning, in the sense that we understand meaning. They are the marks that we look at and try to read, to decode, to interpret. The bedding planes are records, but they do not carry intention. The 47 characters carry intention, the intention of a mind that chose to inscribe something in a specific place at a specific moment for reasons that made sense to that mind, even if those reasons are now opaque to us. The intention persists long after the mind that held it is gone. This is the miracle of inscription. This is why human beings have been carving characters and painting walls and marking stones since far longer than any of our formal histories record. The intention persists. The mark outlasts the maker. Something of the mind survives in the material record, waiting for another mind to encounter it and feel, across whatever distance of time and space and cultural difference, the presence of another person. Paul Whitmore felt it in the Hartley Vale Passage. Thomas Harrington felt it, looking at the 7 smooth river stones arranged on the prepared floor of the Wentworth Falls cavity. The cave survey team felt it, standing before the barrier built from within. You are feeling it now, in a different way. The presence of these minds, these moments, these intentions preserved in stone and documented in reports and transmitted across time to reach you here, tonight, in the comfortable dark of wherever you are resting. You are the latest person in a long chain of people who have stood in relation to the underground mysteries of the Blue Mountains and felt the presence of something that preceded them, something that did not explain itself, something that simply was and waited and held its meaning with a patience that human minds can only approximate. Rest in that patience now. You do not need to decode anything. You do not need to explain anything. You only need to rest, and in resting, to join briefly the long chain of people who have encountered these mysteries and not resolved them and gone on with their lives, carrying the questions quietly and finding, over time, that unresolved questions are among the most comfortable things to carry. They do not demand resolution. They only ask to be carried. Carry them into sleep now. They will be lighter in the morning. Deep in the karst country of the western Blue Mountains, where the limestone sits beneath thin soils and the surface is dotted with dolines, those circular depressions that form when the roof of a shallow underground void collapses, there is a grove of apple trees. The apple trees should not be there. They are not native. They are the descendant of cultivated trees that were planted by someone at some point in the colonial or early post-Federation period, and which have, over decades, or more likely over a century, grown and fruited and spread seeds through the agency of birds and possums, establishing a small, self-sustaining population in a spot that receives sufficient water from the karst drainage to support them through dry periods. Nobody planted them there with that intention. They arrived, in their indirect way, through the chain of human activity that brought apple trees to Australia, and then left this particular grove to its own devices in the limestone country. In spring, the grove flowers. White blossoms against the gray-green of the surrounding eucalyptus. In late summer, small apples hang from the branches, hard and sour, nothing like the commercial cultivars, but recognizably apples, edible if you are hungry and not too particular. The grove is not on any map. It is not in any heritage register. It is known to some of the local landholders and to some of the bushwalkers who have moved through the country with sufficient attention to notice things that are not supposed to be there. It is a small mystery, a domestic mystery, a mystery with a perfectly ordinary explanation at its root. Someone planted apple trees nearby. Seeds were dispersed. Trees grew. But the specific location, in the karst country, above the voids and the limestone passages and the cave systems, gives it an additional quality. The roots of the apple trees reach down through the thin soil and find the limestone, and they follow the cracks and the fissures, as tree roots do, seeking the water that moves through the rock. The roots of the grove are, in a small way, exploring the same underground that the cavers and geologists and mining engineers and army surveyors have been trying to understand for generations. The roots do not keep records. They do not take photographs or file reports or write journal entries. They simply grow, following the water, in their patient, non-deliberate way. But they are in the underground. They are part of the network. They are connected to everything we have been discussing tonight, in the way that the underground connects everything that reaches into it. The roots and the rainwater and the cave streams and the stalactites and the sealed chambers and the tally marks and the 47 characters and the worked stone in the river Styx. The underground is a commons. It belongs to everything that touches it. The apple tree roots and the cave shrimp and the slow drip of stalactite water and the cool air moving through the Bell Range passages all share it, all depend on it, all are part of its slow and patient life. You are part of it too, in the way that all surface things are part of the underground, resting on it, sustained by the groundwater it holds, shaped by the geological processes it embodies, dependent on the stability it provides. The underground holds you up. It has always held you up. It holds you now. In the Jenolan cave system, in the accessible tourist sections, there's a chamber called the Temple of Baal. It was named in the 19th century, when the fashion for dramatic, classical, and biblical nomenclature in cave naming was at its height. The name is not particularly apt in any specific sense, but it captures something about the quality of the space. Its height, its formations, the quality of light that plays on the speleothems in certain angles. Beyond the Temple of Baal, in the less visited sections of the cave, the nomenclature becomes sparser. Passages are identified by numbers or by the names of the explorers who first entered them. The poetry of naming runs out as the known runs into the unknown, and the unknown gets the plainest descriptions available. Beyond even those, in the River Styx section and its tributaries, the unnamed begins. The sections of the system that have been entered but not fully surveyed, that exist in the exploration record as a dive log entry or a caver's note, rather than a formal map feature. And beyond those, the genuinely unknown. The sections that have not been entered at all, that are inferred from hydrology or geophysics, but not directly observed, that exist as absences in the map of what is known. Every map has edges. The edge of the Jenolan map is somewhere in the water-filled passages below and beyond the River Styx section. It is somewhere in the unmapped tributaries that carry water to the main stream from catchment areas that have been traced only by the imprecise method of dye tracing, not by direct human presence. At the edge of the map, the unknown begins. The unknown is not empty. It is full of exactly what it has always been full of: rock and water and formation and the slow processes of dissolution and deposition that have been operating in this landscape since long before there was anyone to name anything or map anything or wonder about what lay beyond the edge of what was known. You are at the edge of the map right now, the edge of the waking map. The territory beyond the edge is the territory of sleep, which is thoroughly unmapped in any cartographic tradition, which cannot be mapped because the instruments of mapping are the instruments of waking consciousness, and they do not function in the territory beyond the edge. The territory beyond the edge is real. You have been there every night of your life. You have returned from it every morning without being able to report on it in any meaningful way, because the instruments of reporting are the instruments of waking consciousness, and they were not running while you were there. But you know it is real. You know it in the way the body knows things, in the restoration that arrives with morning, in the quality of the wakened mind after sufficient time in the unmapped territory, in the occasional fragment of dream that survives into waking as a mood or an image or a wordless sense of having been somewhere. The unmapped territory of the underground Blue Mountains is like the unmapped territory of sleep in this respect. Both are real. Both are entered and exited, but not fully known. Both restore and contain and remain in their essential character beyond the reach of the waking instruments. Let the boundary between them dissolve a little now. Let the unmapped underground and the unmapped sleep meet in the comfortable dark behind your closed eyes. Let the cool temperature of the deep cave and the warmth of your resting body find their own equilibrium. Let the patience of the limestone and the urgency of your need for rest negotiate their gentle arrangement. The boundary is already dissolving. You are already at the edge of the map. Step across. The unknown is waiting, patient and real and full of whatever it has always been full of. Go into it. The morning will bring you back. Somewhere in the Blue Mountains tonight, an animal is moving through the dark. Perhaps a wallaby, stepping carefully down a slope in the moonlight, its large ears rotating to catch the sounds that indicate danger or safety. Perhaps a wombat, emerging from its burrow in the sandstone to graze in the cool night air. Perhaps a glider, launching from a high branch and spreading its membrane, sailing through the dark of the forest on a thermal that only it can feel. These animals do not know about the tunnels. They do not know about the 47 characters, or the barrier built from within, or the worked stone in the River Styx. They move through the surface landscape in their appropriate way, attending to the things that matter to a wallaby or a wombat or a glider: food, water, safety, warmth. But some of them know the underground in ways that we do not. The wombats burrow through the soil, and sometimes through the soft sandstone, creating warrens that can extend for considerable distances underground. The cave-adapted invertebrates spend their entire lives in the dark below the surface, navigating by senses that have no surface analog. The bats that roost in the accessible cave entrances of the range, the bent-wing bats and the little cave bats and the eastern horseshoe bats, spend their resting hours underground and their hunting hours on the surface, moving between the two worlds with a facility that no human can match. The bats know both worlds. They hang in the dark of the cave in their winter torpor, their metabolism slowed to the minimum required to maintain life, their body temperatures dropping toward the ambient cave temperature, their dreams, if bats dream, perhaps composed of the acoustic maps they build with their echolocation calls, the complex three-dimensional models of the spaces they navigate. A bat in torpor in a cave in the Blue Mountains is at rest in the underground in a way that is the most complete rest available to a living thing. The metabolic rate at its minimum, the body temperature regulated downward, the senses quiet, the world reduced to the immediate, the texture of the rock, the cool air, the weight of the body against the surface to which it clings. You are approaching something like that minimum now. The metabolic slowdown of deep sleep, the temperature regulation of the resting body, the senses quieting toward their nighttime minimum. The bats hang in the dark. You rest in the warm. Both of you are doing the most fundamental thing a living body can do: conserving what is essential, releasing what is not, maintaining the conditions that make tomorrow possible. The bats will fly again at dusk. You will wake again at dawn. Both of you will return from the rest with whatever the rest provides: the restoration, the consolidation, the mysterious renewal that sleep and torpor accomplish in ways that biology has not yet fully explained. The underground holds the bats in their caves. The night holds you in your rest. Both of you safe. Both of you cared for by the particular kind of care that the world provides to things that are willing to stop and be held and trust the process. Stop. Be held. Trust the process. Sleep. The last sound of the Blue Mountains. If you were there now, on the plateau edge, above the Gross Valley, in the hour before dawn, the sound would be this: silence, primarily. The deepest silence of the night, the hour when even the nocturnal animals have largely gone quiet, when the wind has dropped to nothing, when the temperature is at its lowest point and the air is still. And then, gradually, as you stood there in the silence, you would begin to hear the underlying sounds. Not the silence itself, but the sounds that are always present but require the silence of the late night to become audible. The sound of the forest breathing, the faint rustle of leaves and the small movements of air that are always present, even in the stillest nights. The sound of water, distant, somewhere below in the valley, the Gross River moving over its stones in the dark. And perhaps, if the conditions were right, the faint movement of air from below, from a fissure in the cliff face, from a crack in the sandstone where the underground breathes out into the surface world. The breath of the mountain. Cool, slightly damp, carrying the mineral signature of deep rock. The mountain breathes. The forest breathes. The river moves in the dark. The bats hang in their caves. The tally marks wait above the waterline. The 47 characters hold their meaning in patient limestone. The compass needle rests on its unresolved bearing. The barrier remains sealed from within. The worked stone lies in the river Styx. Everything is exactly as it is. Everything is held in the enormous, patient, indifferent, somehow comforting fact of being exactly what it is, in exactly the place it is, at exactly this moment. Including you. You are exactly what you are, in exactly the place you are, at exactly this moment. The mountain breathes, you breathe. Both of you are held in the same enormous night. Both of you are part of the same ancient world. Both of you are resting, in your respective ways, in the deep hour before dawn. Sleep now. The dawn will come. The tunnels will still be there. The questions will still be there. Everything will still be there. And you will be rested, and the world will be new, and the day will begin again in the ordinary, extraordinary way that days always begin. With light arriving from the east, with the birds starting before full light, with the eucalyptus forest emerging from the dark in its silver gray and rust red, with the mist in the valleys lifting slowly as the temperature rises, with the Blue Mountains being exactly what they are: ancient, patient, full of mysteries that do not need solving tonight, and you, rested, and the day beginning. But not yet, not yet. For now, the night. For now, the underground dark. For now, the slow breath of the mountain and the slow breath of your sleeping self, and the 47 characters holding their meaning in the cool limestone and the river Styx running over whatever it runs over in the unmapped dark. For now, sleep. Just sleep. Good night. The geology of sleep is not so different from the geology of the underground. Both involve layers. Both involve the accumulation of material over time. In the underground, layers of sediment and calcium carbonate and the slow record of geological process. In sleep, layers of brain state, cycling through the architecture of the sleeping mind in patterns that take approximately 90 minutes to complete one full rotation. In one layer, the body consolidates what it learned during the day, moving memories from short-term storage to the deeper, more permanent structures of long-term memory. In another layer, the body repairs itself, releasing growth hormone, restoring the cellular machinery of muscles and organs, clearing the metabolic waste products that accumulate in the brain during waking. In the deepest layer, something happens that science has not yet fully characterized, a process that is associated with the most complete form of rest, the most profound disconnection from the waking world, the most restorative quality of sleep. The deepest layer is the one you are approaching now. It is not far. It is just below the surface of where you are. Just one more descent, one more step down into the cool and the quiet, one more movement away from the surface and toward the deep place where the temperature is constant and the noise of the surface world does not reach. The underground of the Blue Mountains has its deep layers too. Below the accessible cave systems, below the passages that have been explored and documented, below even the passages that are known but not yet mapped, there is deeper rock, the basement rock, the ancient foundation beneath everything, the metamorphic and igneous rock that underlies the sedimentary sequence, the material that has been there since before the limestone and the sandstone were deposited, that will be there after the limestone and the sandstone have been eroded away. Nobody has been in the basement rock of the Blue Mountains. Nobody can be. It is too deep, too hard, too remote from any accessible surface. It exists only in the data from deep boreholes and geophysical surveys, inferred from signals that travel through it and carry back the signature of its density and its composition. The basement rock does not know about the 47 characters or the barrier built from within, or the worked stone in the river Styx. It does not know about the 15 tunnels. It predates all of them by hundreds of millions of years and will postdate all of them by as long again. But it holds them up. The basement rock holds everything up. The limestone and the sandstone and the cave systems and the passages and the formations and the mysteries and the surface landscape and the trees and the animals and the people who have passed through the mountains over the tens of thousands of years of human presence in the range. Something holds you up too. You do not need to know what it is. You do not need to analyze or identify or describe it. You only need to let it do what it does. Hold you. Support you. Maintain the foundation on which your rest is possible. Let the foundation do its work. Let the basement hold. Sleep. The cave shrimp of the Blue Mountains karst system is a remarkable creature. It is small, a few centimeters in length. It is pale, almost translucent, having lost the pigmentation that its surface-dwelling ancestors possessed because pigmentation requires metabolic resources, and in the dark of the underground, there is nothing to protect against and no competition advantage to gain from being colored. Its eyes are vestigial, present in some species as small residual structures, but non-functional, having atrophied over the generations in which they provided no useful information. The cave shrimp navigates by other means. It has long, sensitive antennae that detect water movements and chemical gradients. It has sensory hairs along its body that respond to pressure changes. It builds, from these non-visual sources of information, a model of its environment that is sufficient for its purposes: finding food, avoiding predators, locating mates. Its world is defined entirely by what it can sense with its body in the immediate space around it. There is no horizon. There is no sky. There is no distance. There is the immediate, the sensory, the present moment of the underground stream. It is, in this sense, a creature that lives entirely in the present. It cannot plan for a future it cannot see. It cannot refer to a past that its sensory apparatus does not record. It exists in the continuous now of the cave environment, the constant temperature, the consistent dark, the steady flow of water carrying food particles from the surface. There is something restful about this image, not because you want to be a cave shrimp, you do not, but because the quality of its existence, stripped of the past and future that consciousness imposes on our experience of time, has something to teach about the quality of rest. In sleep, you approach the cave shrimp's relationship with time. The waking self, with its timeline and its memories and its anticipations and its running tally of what has been and what is to come, retreats. What remains is something closer to the immediate, the sensory reality of the resting body, the temperature of the air, the weight of the body, the texture of breath. You do not become a cave shrimp when you sleep, but the cave shrimp's world, immediate, sensory, present, is the direction in which sleep takes you. The cave shrimp is there now, in the underground of the Blue Mountains, doing what it always does, moving through the water, attending to what is immediately around it, living in the only moment that exists. You are here, moving toward that moment. Almost there. Almost in the cave. Almost in the dark. Almost in the constant temperature and the constant quiet of the deep place where rest is complete. Almost. And now, sleep. There is a word in geology, diagenesis, that describes the process by which sediment becomes rock. It is not a sudden process. It is not a moment. It is a transformation that occurs over millions of years under pressure in the presence of groundwater that moves through the sediment and deposits minerals in the spaces between the grains, cementing them together. Diagenesis is the process that turned the sand of ancient rivers into the sandstone of the Blue Mountains cliffs. It is the process that turned the shells and bodies of ancient marine organisms into the limestone of the karst country. It is the process by which the loose and unconsolidated becomes the solid and permanent. You are undergoing a version of this process every night in a different register. The loose and unconsolidated experiences of the day, the conversations and observations and decisions and emotions and sensory impressions that have accumulated since you woke this morning, are being processed, consolidated, transformed during sleep into the more permanent structures of memory and understanding. The loose sediment of experience is becoming the rock of who you are. This is not a metaphor. This is, in a loose sense, what sleep does. The hippocampus, the structure in the brain most directly associated with the formation and consolidation of memories, is particularly active during certain stages of sleep. The slow oscillations of deep sleep are associated with the transfer of information from short-term to long-term storage. The dream states of lighter sleep are associated with the processing and integration of emotional experience. You are being made, slowly, by your sleep. The person who wakes tomorrow will be slightly different from the person who lay down tonight, not in any dramatic way, but in the subtle accretion of consolidated experience, the slight addition to the solid structure of who you are, the diagenesis of the self. The Blue Mountains understand diagenesis. They are built from it. Everything solid in the range began as something loose and unconsolidated, sand, shell fragments, mineral-rich water, and was transformed by time and pressure and chemistry into the rock that now holds up the forest and the towns and the tourists and the cave systems and the 15 tunnels and their mysteries. You are being transformed in exactly the same way, slowly, patiently, in the dark, by processes that do not require your conscious participation. Let them proceed. The transformation is happening whether you watch it or not. In fact, it proceeds best when you are not watching. When you have released the day and the questions and the need to understand what is happening, and you simply rest in the dark while the consolidation does its work. Rest in the dark. Let the consolidation proceed. Wake, tomorrow, slightly more solid, slightly more yourself. The rock takes millions of years. You take a night. Both are miracles of patient transformation. Sleep. In the colonial period, the Blue Mountains were known as the Barrier Range. This name, which did not survive the crossing of 1813, being replaced fairly quickly by the more geological description that referenced the actual mountains, captures something true about the way the range presented itself to the early European settlers of Sydney. It was a barrier. It was the edge of the known. It was the place where the coastal corridor of early settlement ended and something else began. Something that, in the first decades of European presence in Australia, was entirely opaque. The barrier was real. The sandstone escarpments that defined the eastern edge of the plateau presented no obvious route for people on foot or on horseback. Every attempt to penetrate the range by following the valleys, the obvious approach, the approach that would have worked in most of the mountain ranges of Europe, failed because the valleys of the Blue Mountains are not routes through the range. They are dead ends. They descend into gorges with vertical walls and no exit. The natural routes through the range are the ridgelines, and the ridgelines are not where you look for routes if you are accustomed to European topography. The Aboriginal people of the region had known the ridgeline routes for tens of thousands of years. They had crossed the mountains and traded with the people of the Western Plains and returned. Their routes were encoded in their knowledge of the landscape, in their song lines, in their oral traditions, in the practical geography that generations of inhabitation had refined. The European settlers did not have access to that knowledge, or did not seek it, or did not understand what they were being offered when they sought it. And so they bounced off the barrier for 25 years before Blaxland and Lawson and Wentworth found the ridge route in 1813, a route that was, almost certainly, already known in the indigenous tradition of the region. The barrier has always been more apparent than real. What looks like an impassable obstacle from one angle has a way through if you know where to look. The ridgeline route was there all along. This is true of many apparent barriers. The barrier between waking and sleep is real. There is a genuine transition between the two states, a shift in brain chemistry and brain state that constitutes a real threshold. But the transition is not an obstacle. It is a doorway. And the way through it is not effort, but release. Not pushing harder towards sleep, but releasing the waking state, letting it go, allowing the transition to happen as it would happen if you did not interfere with it. You know the ridgeline route now. It is not where you've been looking, perhaps. It is not through the valley of effort or the gorge of trying. It is along the ridge of release, the quiet, lateral route that follows the path of least resistance from waking to sleep. Follow the ridge. Release the day. Let the transition happen as it is designed to happen, not forced, not effortful, but natural as water finding its way through limestone, as natural as sand becoming sandstone under the patient weight of time. The barrier is not real. The doorway is right here. Sleep. Something about the quality of darkness in deep caves has interested researchers who study human experience for many decades. The darkness in a sealed cave, with all artificial light sources removed, is different in character from any darkness available at the surface. At the surface, even in the darkest conditions, a moonless, cloudy night, far from artificial light, there is some small residual luminance. The sky is never perfectly dark, even without the moon. The stars contribute a tiny amount of light. The atmosphere itself glows faintly with the diffuse scattering of distant sources, and the human eye, adapted for surface conditions, generates its own visual noise, the phosphene activity of the visual system continuing even in the absence of input. In a sealed cave, the residual luminance of the sky is absent. The atmospheric glow is absent. Only the eye's own noise remains, and over a period of some minutes, even that is experienced differently. Less as visual information, and more as the awareness of the visual system's own activity in the absence of anything to process. People who have spent extended time in complete cave darkness report a range of experiences. Some report a sense of the darkness as solid, as having a physical presence and weight. Some report a sense of spatial expansion, as though the boundaries of the space have become indeterminate and the cave has become larger than it actually is. Some report a kind of clarity, a shift in the quality of attention, away from visual processing and toward other senses, a heightening of the sensitivity to sound and touch, and the proprioceptive sense of where the body is in space. Some report a sense of ease. The complete darkness of the cave, they say, is restful in a way that no surface darkness achieves. The eye, habituated to constant visual input, finds something like rest in the genuine absence of input. The visual system, no longer required to process and respond and interpret, enters a kind of standby mode. And in that standby, something relaxes that is never fully relaxed in the waking, lit world. You have the residual luminance of the surface world with you tonight. The small glow of a digital clock, perhaps. The faint light through curtains. The phosphene activity of your own visual system behind closed eyes. You are not in the complete darkness of the cave, but you are approaching something of the same quality. The darkness behind closed eyes is deeper than the darkness of the room, and in that darkness, the visual system is finding its own version of standby. The input is removed. The processing is winding down. The interpretation and response are becoming unnecessary. Let the visual system rest. Let the other senses take whatever they need from the environment and find that there is nothing urgent there. Only the temperature of the air, the weight of the body, the slow rhythm of breath. Let the attention release from its outward orientation and settle inward, toward the warmth, toward the stillness, toward the gentle and continuous fact of being alive and at rest. The cave darkness is very deep. Your darkness is deep enough. Sleep is close. Very close now. In 1901, the year the Australian states federated into a single nation, a surveyor named Edmund Carrick was engaged to map a section of the Cox's River catchment for water resources purposes. The work was routine. Carrick was an experienced surveyor who had worked across various parts of New South Wales and who found the Blue Mountains terrain challenging but not extraordinary. He kept a field notebook, as surveyors do. The notebook is a record of traverses and bearings and observations about the landscape, written in the compressed notation of someone for whom the notebook is a working tool rather than a literary production. On a particular day in late April, which was autumn and therefore cooler and drier than the summer months, Carrick's notebook records a feature that does not fit the pattern of the surrounding entries. He notes in the middle of a description of a ridge traverse that he observed what he describes as a constructed opening in the eastern face of a limestone exposure, approximately 200 yards from the ridgeline. He notes that the opening was arched in form, roughly a yard wide, and that it showed evidence of modification of the natural limestone. He notes that he did not have time to investigate further, given the requirements of his survey schedule. He returns to the notebook's ordinary pattern of bearings and distances and landscape descriptions, and the constructed opening is not mentioned again. Carrick filed his survey notes with the relevant department on completion of his contract. The field notebook was retained in the departmental archives and eventually transferred to the State Records Archives, where it was cataloged and filed and largely forgotten until a researcher working on the history of colonial-era water resource surveys came across it in the early 2000s. The researcher noted the April entry. She cross-referenced the description of the location, 200 yards east of the ridgeline at the point where Carrick's traverse intersected the limestone exposure, with modern topographic maps of the area. The location could be approximately identified, though not precisely. She wrote a brief note in the margin of her research file, worth following up, and then she moved on to other parts of her research project, and the brief note remained in the margin of a research file, which is where many interesting things end up, waiting for the particular convergence of time and interest and resources that would move them from the margin to the center. The constructed opening in the eastern face of the limestone exposure has not been specifically investigated. Whether it is still accessible, whether the vegetation and the rock fall of a century have not collapsed or concealed it beyond practical finding, is unknown. Whether what Carrick described as a constructed opening is what surveyors in 2025 would also describe as constructed, or whether it was a natural feature that the trained but non-specialist eye of a 19th century surveyor interpreted as modified, is also unknown. What is known is that Edmund Carrick was a competent professional who used language carefully and precisely in his field notebooks, and that the word constructed is not a word that appears elsewhere in the notebook to describe natural features. He used it once for this one feature and then returned to the precise and unambiguous language of surveyors for everything else. Constructed, in the limestone, 200 yards from the ridge, waiting, perhaps, just as it waited in April 1901, when Edmund Carrick did not have time to investigate further. There is something called a stalactite that you may have seen in photographs or in person if you have visited any of the developed cave systems of Australia or elsewhere. A stalactite hangs from the ceiling of a cave, pointed downward, typically pale in color, built from the calcium carbonate that precipitates from water droplets as they hang at the cave ceiling and evaporate. Its counterpart, the stalagmite, grows upward from the cave floor, below the drip point, building from the same mineral-rich water as it lands and evaporates. In some caves, where the conditions have been stable for long enough, a stalactite and a stalagmite meet. The descending and ascending formations join in the middle of the cave space to create a column. The column marks a point where the drip has been continuous for long enough, and the conditions have been favorable enough that the two halves of a single process of mineral deposition have found each other and become one. The column in a cave is a record of patience, of the thousands of years during which the water dripped and the mineral precipitated and the formation grew, millimeter by millimeter, downward from the ceiling and upward from the floor, until the gap closed and the column was complete. In the Jenolan cave system, there are columns. Some of them are very large, the result of hundreds of thousands of years of patient mineral deposition. Some of them are in the tourist sections and are lit from below and above to show their translucent quality, the pale honey color of the calcite, the faint banding that records periods of faster and slower growth. In the river Styx section, there may be columns that no one has seen. In the unmapped tributaries, formations of unknown character and unknown age. Columns that have been growing in complete dark for the entire history of human presence in the Blue Mountains. Growing through the tens of thousands of years of Aboriginal habitation, through the colonial period, through the Federation, through the 2 world wars and the Depression and the post-war boom, and every development of the subsequent decades. Growing regardless. Patient regardless. Complete in their process regardless of whether anyone was watching. You do not need to be watched to be complete. You do not need to be observed to proceed with your process. The consolidation of sleep happens whether or not anyone is monitoring it. The restoration proceeds in the dark. The transformation from the loose sediment of the day to the solid rock of consolidated experience happens in the night, in the quiet, in the unobserved interior of the sleeping self. You are growing, in your own way, in the dark. Patient, steady, complete. Sleep. The fern gullies of the Blue Mountains are among the most beautiful landscapes in Australia, and they are landscapes that exist because of the underground. The gullies descend from the plateau in tight, sheltered crevices, where the sandstone walls block the drying wind and the angle of the sun reduces evaporation. Water drains into these gullies from the surrounding plateau, and some of it drains slowly out of the sandstone walls themselves, seeping through the porous rock and emerging as weeps and seeps that keep the gully walls damp even in dry periods. This constant moisture, sheltered from wind and direct sun, creates conditions in which cool, temperate rainforest can survive in a landscape that would otherwise be too dry for it. The tree ferns grow to 3 meters in the gully bottoms, the great tree ferns, whose fronds unfurl in perfect spirals, whose trunks are covered in the dense mat of root fibers that give them their distinctive dark brown texture. Mosses cover every available rock surface. Liverworts grow in the most sheltered spots. The air in a Blue Mountains fern gully on a still day is cool and damp and slightly fragrant with the smell of wet vegetation and old stone. The underground makes this possible. The slow release of stored water through the sandstone walls, water that entered the rock during the last rainfall, perhaps weeks or months ago, sustains the gully vegetation through the dry periods between rains. The underground is the buffer, the storage, the slow and patient provider of moisture to a landscape that would otherwise dry out. This buffering function of the underground is one of its most important roles in the surface ecosystem. The plants and animals of the Blue Mountains depend on the underground not in the sense of living in it, but in the sense of being sustained by the slow and steady release of what the underground stores. The underground is the reserve, the deep account from which the surface draws in times of need. You have a deep account too. The reserves of the body, the glycogen stored in the liver and muscles, the fat reserves that sustain the body through periods of insufficient intake, the immune reserves that respond to challenge, the tissue reserves that repair damage, all of these are the underground of the physical self. Not immediately available, not on the surface, but present and real and sustaining. And sleep is part of what restores those reserves. The night is when the body replenishes what the day depleted. The quiet is when the repair happens. The dark is when the account is refilled, slowly, patiently, by the processes that work best in the absence of the demands of waking. The gully ferns are sustained by the underground storage of the plateau. You are sustained by the restoration of sleep. Both systems work best when left to their own process, when the demand is reduced, when the intake is allowed to exceed the output, when the account is allowed to refill before the next withdrawal. Your account is refilling now, slowly, patiently, in the dark. The ferns will be there in the morning. You will be there in the morning. Both of you sustained, both of you ready. One more thing before the silence. The Blue Mountains are named for their color. On certain days, at certain times, the range appears blue from a distance, a soft, hazy blue that is different from the blue of the sky and different from the blue of the sea. It is the blue of the eucalyptus forest, a blue produced by the oil droplets that eucalyptus trees release into the atmosphere, fine droplets of volatile oil that scatter the short wavelengths of sunlight and produce the distinctive haze that has given the mountains their name. The blue is real. It is not an optical illusion, and it is not a poetic invention. It is a genuine optical phenomenon produced by the chemistry of the trees, by the eucalyptus oil that is the defining chemical product of the dominant trees of the eastern Australian landscape. The oil that also gives the eucalyptus its distinctive scent, its medicinal properties, its role in the fire ecology of the Australian bush. The blue of the Blue Mountains is, in this sense, the smell of the mountains made visible. The volatile oils that you smell when you are in the bush, that clean, sharp, slightly medicinal scent that is unmistakably Australian bush, are the same compounds that produce the blue haze. The smell and the color are the same thing, in different sensory registers. This is a fact that becomes more interesting the longer you sit with it. The color of the mountains is their smell, made visible. You can see, from a distance, the chemistry that you smell close up. The landscape announces itself across a distance in both senses simultaneously. You carry your own chemistry. The particular combination of molecules that constitutes your physical self, the hormones and neurotransmitters and metabolic products that regulate your experience of the world, is unique to you. It is your version of the eucalyptus oil. It is what you are made of in the most intimate and precise sense. In sleep, your chemistry changes. The hormones of waking, the cortisol, the adrenaline, the stress hormones that keep the body ready for the demands of the day, decrease. The hormones of sleep and repair, melatonin, growth hormone, the neurotransmitters of deep rest, increase. The chemistry of the sleeping body is different from the chemistry of the waking body, and the difference is the difference between readiness for demand and readiness for restoration. Your chemistry is shifting now. The waking chemistry is decreasing, slowly, as the light fades from your awareness and the demands of the day recede. The sleeping chemistry is increasing, responding to the darkness and the stillness and the horizontal position of the resting body. You are becoming, chemically, a sleeping person. You are almost there. The Blue Mountains are blue with their chemistry. You are warm with yours. Both of you exactly what you are. Both of you proceeding. Both of you, in your respective ways, announcing yourselves to the surrounding air in the language of molecules. The language is quiet tonight. The chemistry is settling. The sleep is very close. Let it come. Let it come. The mountains are blue in the daylight. You are warm in the dark. And the night is complete, and the rest is real, and the tunnels are there below the sandstone and the limestone and the fern gullies and the eucalyptus oil and the blue haze and the long views to the west. And you are here, and the sleep is here, and there is nothing else at all. Good night.